What up, people? Waiting on the fellas. What's up, buddy?
Hey, Josiah, how's my volume? I sound good.
But the audience will tell us.
Hey, hi.
They
Hey.
will be the judges.
Hey, it's your face.
It is, Hutch. I guess it is our first show where I've shown my face. So
He's revealed himself.
that's true.
What's up, boys?
Nothing much.
Man, it's brutal to be in Democratic politics for the past 5
my
days,
God.
6 days in particular.
It's fucking brutal.
Dude, how are you?
It's fucking brutal. I agree. I concur. This is just a nightmare.
It really is. It really is. And for some reason, his connection is 8 out of 10, and he is a bit laggy. There we go. Now it's better. Now Hutch is at
Volume good.
8 out of 10. How's everybody's volume?
Apparently mine's good. I don't know.
Kind of weird. Hutch gives himself the largest camera space. I gave him the largest camera space, and that'll change as soon as Pisco comes up. Then we'll be in a grid formation. He's also got that panoramic view, so that helps.
Like that. Do it like.
Oh man. Waiting for Pisco. I think he's still yelling at Steven?
Can I turn your mic up? Because you sound a little quiet to me.
Yeah, I can turn it up.
There you go. That's better.
Yeah, man, it's been brutal. That debate was painful. Then the Supreme Court decision, I'm kind of more fucked up by than anything else. I do think it's just objectively a bigger story by far than the bad debate. But the bad debate it's in a feedback loop at the moment, taking the bad thing and making it worse, which we Democrats are pretty good at electorally. So yeah, it's kind of a double whammy.
Yeah, I would agree. I guess our last show we skipped the debate, or I guess if we did have a show, it would have been the day before the debate. So I guess it wouldn't have mattered either way. But it was a tough one. I guess we'll see what Pisco thinks when he hops in and stops arguing with Destiny over on his channel. So
yeah. Let's see. Take some questions here.
You know what you need, Josiah? You sound very deflated. You need to have a conversation with IRI.
Yeah. Yeah. And he's the eternal optimist.
Juicy up on that hopium.
He's too optimistic, man. Too optimistic right now.
Yeah, I don't know. I've always been a cynic, and I was feeling pretty down prior to the debate because, I mean, just for the most part, in aggregate, we were behind on the polls, and Democrats have to overperform, at least presidentially, to win just because of the Electoral College. And then I have a low cringe threshold. Like, I can't stand like truly embarrassing things to be witness to them. Like I fold in on myself in a cringe singularity. So I made it through 3/4 of the debate and then had to stop. And it wasn't just Biden. Trump is a profoundly embarrassing man too. So it's hard for me to watch Trump speeches and Trump rallies. So it's just like this dual factor thing. And then the Supreme Court decision. And it's just, fuck, man. It's been awful.
Decisions. All their decisions. I mean, because
some
of the other things they decided, besides obviously the immunity case, like they ruled that bribery is legal. That's a thing that they ruled, which was pretty insane. Obviously, the Chevron deference is a pretty interesting ruling as well. Yeah, I don't know, man. It's pretty crazy. Like the ruling on the bribery thing seemed so incredibly insane. It was almost a little appetizer for the immunity ruling, because essentially the ruling in that case was, well, if you're the mayor and you grant a bunch of contracts to your buddies, and then your buddies repay you by giving you tens of thousands of dollars in consulting fees, that doesn't count as bribery because that happened out. You got those payments after you left office, right?
Right. The quid followed the pro in this case. Yeah. It's really asinine. I mean, this goes back to what I've been bitching about on my channel ad nauseum, which is the Supreme Court may not be the immediate problem, but it is the ultimate problem as far as getting our democracy back on track. Anything we do ultimately goes to the court. If we want to federalize, or if we want to legalize marijuana, for example, that can be struck down by the Supreme Court. It's a federal statute. If we want to codify road protections into law, well, it has to go up against the Supreme Court. And then, of course, then you have even like, for example, like I would have a hard time imagining they do this, but I also had a hard time imagining they would grant Trump the sweeping immunity that they did. But even if you wanted to codify more strict environmental protections in the aftermath of Chevron into a specific and explicit federal statute, they could strike that down too. And the great thing about being the court is you can come up with your own bullshit reason. You don't have to, it doesn't have to pass the smell test. You can just say, well, the Constitution of the United States didn't say anything about no daggum environment, and so anything like it involves regulating the environment's anti-historical, it's anti-textualist, blah blah blah. So, got to change the court, fellas.
Yeah, the founders didn't. They weren't concerned with carbon emissions back in the 1700s. So I'm not sure if there was any constitutional basis for this here emissions rule. Yeah, obviously it's pretty crazy. I mean, we were talking about it right before the when we hopped on Destiny's stream, or no, it was during when we hopped on Destiny's stream, about how I have to imagine that amongst elected Democrats in the House and Senate, that this is a pretty radicalizing moment for them, where it's like, look, guys, I understand we were playing that centrist bullshit before about, oh, we can't do this or that to the court because the court's like this sacred institution. That looks bad, doesn't it? Like, I feel like at a certain point, it's like, guys, we gotta stop doing this. We gotta buckle down and actually make some shit happen on this court here, because it's only going to get worse, right? I mean, any cumulative decision just seems like it's going to get worse and worse on behalf of the Supreme Court. So
I have some thoughts about that, but I want to save it for the.
Oh, fair enough. Yeah. Accountable, that's how your debate was with Rob. I didn't watch, but I don't think I can suffer him any longer.
Yeah, I think Rob is kind of incapable at this point of having a calm discussion with anybody of a different political persuasion. I try to enter that conversation with just a pretty basic, like, yeah, I mean, these protections seem pretty crazy to give to the president and this and that. And for some reason, that was the context of the conversation. But Rob immediately opens it up with, well, I'm going to prove here that you and all the Democrats are a bunch of bad faith pieces of shit when it comes to Biden's cognitive issues. It's like, I didn't know this is what.
Sir, this is a Wendy's. This is a Wendy's, sir. What are you?
Like, I reached out to him on Twitter.
He's a disciple of Andrew Wilson, so like you can tell he aspires to be kind of like that guy. So I think he takes his cues from him. Well,
I don't know. Yeah, I mean, the context of our conversation was like, we want to talk about the ruling, and so we spent like 30 minutes talking about that. To which I just basically said, like, I don't know who you're talking about, but I feel like, at least me personally, I was always pretty open about Biden's cognitive decline and things like this. I just don't think he has dementia or senility or whatever that is. And this was evidence that I was a bad faith, lying hack, piece of shit, or whatever Rob said. But then we actually got onto discussing the court, and I feel like my hypotheticals are pretty reasonable in this regard. He tries to come up with this incredible gotcha where he's like, so you're telling me if Biden knew that he was breaking the law by trying to forgive student loans, should he be prosecuted? And it's like, well, yeah. I mean, if you know you're breaking the law, I feel like that's probably a good reason to open an investigation of some sort. I mean, no matter what the law is, right? It seems like that would be pretty reasonable. Unfortunately, the court disagrees and says, well, actually, it doesn't matter if you think or knowingly are trying to break laws. That doesn't matter in determining whether or not you're criminally immune. And that was kind of the whole point of the debate. And Rob admitted he didn't even read the opinion, right? So, I mean, I'm not sure how seriously you should take specifically Rob's analysis. Obviously, there's conservatives who've read the opinion that you can listen to a little bit more reasonably. But we just disagree on this issue. I don't think Rob is a piece of shit or anything, but he's very quick to ascribe bad faith to basically anyone who disagrees with him, which is obviously a pretty poor tactic on his part. So
I was speaking with him on social media today and yesterday, or with today, and he was making the case that the media has gone easy on Biden regarding his age. And I had to, I was just like, Rob, this is total bubble speak. Anybody who actually like watches the media and reads news articles have watched the media go after Biden pretty consistently since before the last election. And somebody else jumped in, and the argument escalated, and he was doing the same thing that you're describing here, like ascribing bad faith. And then I straight up you can do a Google search and filter it to be like results before a certain year. And I filtered it before. What's up?
During our discussion, he asked me, he chose a different tactic for me. He said, come up with one lie that the right-wing media has told that's even on the same equivalent as the cognitive issues for Biden. I was like, well, there was that whole largest defamation lawsuit in the whole fucking history of the country that Fox News had to pay out for spreading lies and conspiracies about the election. He's like, well, that doesn't count. And there's a lot of centrist rhinos on Fox News. And it's like, oh my God, Rob, Jesus. I'm not even disagreeing that there's a lot of liberal commentators who probably went easy on Biden's cognitive health or whatever, but like, we can't agree that Fox News spreads propaganda too. Like, obviously that's the case, but I don't know. There's no getting through to some people, obviously. So, Pisco, glad you showed up, Mister. Wants to start right at 6:30.
I was
and
here
then you
at 7:31.
showed up late.
I was here at
That's
7.
1 minute late, sir.
How you doing? How's everyone going?
It's good, man.
The vibes are not good.
Crisis.
The vibes are not good.
Party is in crisis.
But before we jump in, can chat say how everybody's volume is, including Pisco's? Pisco, keep talking.
Testing. 1, 2, 3.
We could probably turn him up just a little bit.
Hello.
Turn him up, you think, a little bit?
Just a little bit. Not much.
Hello.
All right,
that's better.
Cool.
Alrighty. Hope everyone's doing okay.
I think Hutch nailed it. It's not a great time to be a Democrat in this country.
But listen, time.
I know you said that you have a hard out at an hour from now.
Yeah.
So I'll just say for the audience, let's just go ahead and get to it. We have 2 topics we want to discuss. Pisco requested this one first, which is the Democratic freakout in the aftermath of President Biden's debate performance. So, since you want to talk about this first, what's up, baby?
Yeah, I think that it's good that we had a episode. Hutch unfortunately couldn't make it. I think he was in Florida when it happened. But Josiah always Nostradamus for some reason. I feel like whenever he talks about something for a little bit in a show or in a video, for whatever reason, it'll come up in a bigger and more significant way later on. And so one of the topics we did was talking about the cognition issue, the kind of age issue, and the is he there issue for Joe Biden. And we, I think, came to a consensus that while there's some issues, or at least I think this is what I think, and I think you guys both agree, there are definitely issues for Joe Biden, that we were more focused on like the media double standard than anything else. And I think it came back in a major way, this debate. This debate was really, really bad for Biden. And for a lot of reasons, both related to the debate itself, but also and the reaction to it, but also like why he performed bad, Biden and the Democratic Party are in crisis. And I think it's a meaningful crisis. And I think it's one that will persist, unfortunately, tough to say, so long as Biden is on the ticket. I've seen the polling. And I can read the polls, and I think that Biden has been, a very important, consequential, excellent president. I've supported him, and I will support him if he stays on the ticket, 100%. I still have my Biden-Harris hat, and I'll wear it proudly, and I will go to bat for Biden and for Harris should they stay on the ticket. But my priority is to save this republic and to preserve this democracy and our way of life and our Constitution. And that means being honest. And my honesty right now is seeing the polling, seeing what I think, because I was a little bit surprised, I'm going to be telling you, at the level of badness of that debate. I don't think that Joe Biden has the skills currently to either turn this around or convince the American people that he is fit to be in office. 80%, something approaching 80% of the country think he's mentally unfit to be president. Even if you think that's all propaganda, that is a humongous hole. And I say this with all the love in my heart. The stakes are too high. And I understand the risks of going with someone else. I understand the costs of doing that. Even in light of those costs, I think the answer is clear. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
released a
Hutch.
video on. Oh no! Well, oh yeah, because
Oh, I was just gonna say, because Hutch did. Listen, I just want to say, Hutch put out a really good video in the aftermath of that debate, and I think it's gone viral. It's on my list of things to react to on my channel. You know, making a pretty good stand by your man defense. I don't know how he feels now. That was several days ago, but just want to put it out there. You all should check that video out.
I have thoughts. I want to hear what you guys think first.
I was gonna say that I think that so I released a video actually today talking about at least who I think would be some of the likely replacements for Biden. What I will say is that the momentum seems really bad for Biden, right? That it seems like everyone seems to be trying to get him to basically drop out of the race, right? In part, he's insulated himself, it seems, by a lot of the reporting by only listening to his family now, and he's not really listening to his political advisors as much. And it seems like the only people in Democratic politics who want Biden to still run are basically people with the last name Biden, right? And so that's kind of unfortunate. I saw some reporting that major donors had started to back out and say, look, we want to back this other person. And, you know, obviously major donors have an outsized influence on any political party. And I mean, I would agree that it's a high risk, high reward strategy. Obviously, it's probably not the case that Joe Biden has any skeletons in his closet that we're not aware of. And so there's probably not going to be many October surprises with regards to Joe Biden. You can't say the same thing about Kamala Harris, Pete Buttigieg. I mean, who knows what those guys have been up to their whole lives, and you're not going to be scrutinized quite like you would be unless you're the Democratic nominee for president. But at the end of the day, though, the polling speaks for itself, and it does seem that there's probably almost certainly more upside to another candidate versus Biden right now. I just can't imagine. I can't imagine looking at Biden and his performance and being like, this is definitely the strongest candidate we have in the Democratic Party. That would be a very surprising conclusion to reach for me.
And I want to let Josiah in, but there's just another thing corollary to what you're saying, or in addition to what you're saying there, Econoboy. It's not just the debate, because people say it's like, oh, you're freaking out about debate. It's our confidence on the recovery. Like, if you really were capable, if it was just a fluke, why wouldn't you be being as out there as possible? I understand he's done some events and stuff. Why wouldn't you be doing these kinds of events that would show your capacity, that kind of thing? Why wouldn't you be taking tough interviews, that kind of thing? And it's in accordance with, we have to be honest, guys, like the same, a similar pattern before. He doesn't take a lot of interviews, certainly not a lot of challenging ones. And so I just don't have the confidence. And again, I will fight for him. If he stays the nominee, it's his choice. But I don't have the confidence that he'll have what it takes to maximize our chances.
Yeah, so for me, I was appalled by the debate by Biden and Trump. Unfortunately, that flies under the radar by obviously right-wing media, but also mainstream media and even left-wing media. We hyperfixate on Biden. But I was horrified. He had an objectively bad performance. And my thought is, listen, I'm not personally loyal to Joe Biden. My view from the beginning is that I wish he had, if someone held a gun to my head and said, okay, and this was months ago, do you wish Biden had said that he would be a transitional president and drop out? My gut was yes, that I wish he would have done that, because I understood, even at the time, based on polling, he was very unpopular and it was going to be very risky to get him reelected. I think he has been a very good president, just objectively speaking, but it's two roles. You have to be president, you have to be the candidate, and they're not correlated. It's possible to be a great president, terrible candidate, great candidate, terrible president. You don't always get both. Somebody like Barack Obama was both, good candidate, good president. At the end of the day, defeating Donald Trump is the most important thing. And I am becoming less convinced that Biden is the means by which to do this. Recent polls seem to suggest that at least Vice President Harris and a couple of other Democratic stalwarts are in striking distance of the president with respect to polling. So it makes one wonder, okay, if Biden is maxed out given that he is the incumbent, he has the fundraising, he has the name recognition.
That's wait, we'll dwell there. Because
Yeah.
the reason that they're below the other ones is largely because of name recognition.
Sure.
And when you adjust for that, it goes up. And Harris has never been leading Biden in any of these polls. It's the first time.
Right. So there is that. Now, of course, others would say, and this is true, that with more spotlight and more attention, there's also risk of those polls for these other potential replacements depleting, and I'm aware of that as well. I'm agnostic on it. My position has been from the beginning, I think the conversation is important. I know some of my viewers and some people on Twitter have blown me up. How dare you even give voice to the idea that we should discuss potentially replacing Biden? I think it's important for Democratic leaders and major donors to have that conversation. At this point, it's not something that is a focus of my channel, because no matter what, Republicans have to lose. And so my position is, I go back to attacking Republicans, defending the Democratic record, which includes President Biden's record. But I do think the conversation needs to be had. It's just not going to be had by me. But I do think like Jamie Raskin and Sheldon Whitehouse and J.B. Pritzker and, Governor Beshear and others as well, I do think they need to be having this conversation. And ultimately, people need to tell President Biden, you can't just deflect from this with octogenarian Irish Catholic stubbornness. I need to know that you are considering the risks, that you are aware of the polling, you are aware of the backlash, and you are making a calculated decision to move forward. If you do that, if Biden comes out and says, listen, I am aware I screwed up the debate, which he has acknowledged. I am aware of the backlash. I'm not going to pretend it's not real. I am aware of all of it. I have weighed the risks. I have sought counsel, and I still believe that I am the best person to defeat Donald Trump. Then I would feel much more comfortable about it. Unfortunately, some of what I'm hearing is what Pisco's talking about, which is some of the reporting suggests that he is blocking out like any devil's advocate. And that's a problem with me. But either way, I'll back Biden over Trump. I think he's been a great president. I think the question needs to be asked, and the conversation needs to be had, just not by me.
Yeah. So I have a lot of thoughts. I'll try to distill it down and be as concise as possible, but I've been giving this a lot of thought. I've been paying attention to the chatter on social media, which I think I'm probably paying a little bit too much attention. And that's influencing my mood and my calculations on this. But I think it's really important to be honest in situations like these. I don't think it makes any sense I've seen a lot of cope about the debate. I saw people complaining about CNN's lighting. I don't know if you guys saw similar tweets where they were accusing CNN of purposefully lighting him like a ghost.
Bullshit, yeah.
And making him look bad. And, that was the reason why he didn't perform well. And I saw other cope, he was over-prepared from his debate prep team. And I don't think any of that is helpful. I think if your job is to comment on these kinds of things, it's just really important to be just upfront and honest with yourself and with your audience. And there's no upside to trying to sugarcoat what happened. I've been covering politics on my stream for around 8 years. I mean, it started roughly around the time that Trump got into politics. That was easily one of the most painful nights in politics for me, personally speaking. As soon as he started speaking, I'm saying 2 sentences in, I felt my heart drop into my chest. And then when he said we beat Medicare, and he trailed off, and he gave what may go down in history as the worst answer to a debate question ever on abortion, when he found a way to shift the conversation away from abortion, his greatest strength, towards immigration, which is his greatest weakness, in terms of public opinion. It really couldn't have gone any worse. I've been telling my chat, aside from him dropping dead, that couldn't have gone any worse, truly. That being said, I think it is important to evaluate the moment that we're in a historical context. And I think that modern politics have demonstrated over and over and over again that whatever the dominant social media narrative is, or even the dominant media narrative is on any given day, that is not assured to be the thing come November. We were surprised shocked even in 2016 when Donald Trump won. I was personally quite shocked in 2022 when the Democrats delivered one of the best first midterm performances for an incumbent party in modern history. And I have been quite encouraged to see the momentum of the Democratic Party in terms of electoral contests and results all over the country in a sustained fashion, basically since the Dobbs decision. But even before that, we're talking about a pretty impressive win streak for the past basically 6 years. And so when you say we're in a state of crisis in terms of like the Democratic Party, I understand where that's coming from. And especially, I just assume all of us spend a lot of time online, and the sort of content that the algorithm feeds us is going to inform our mood and our calculations on our analysis. And the vibes out there are not good. It's just the worst people you know are basically giddy and doing victory laps and dancing on his grave. And I'm talking about people from every political persuasion. I'm just as irritated watching Kyle Kulinski talk about this stuff as I am Rob Knorr. And that sucks. But a lot of people come to like creators for like rational discourse. And I think it's important to sort of like, not to downplay the risks of this moment, but it's important to give people a clear-headed view of things. I actually don't think that the Democratic Party on the whole is in a state of crisis. This moment represents a unique crisis of its own making. But I don't think that the moment that we're in and the results that we've seen across the country support the notion that the party itself is on fire. And I think when you are engaged in politics, some nights are just going to be painful. Like, I wasn't super engaged in politics, but I'm sure 2010 was just a brutal night for Democrats. And I'm sure 2014 was a brutal night for Democrats. And I'm sure 2016 was a brutal night for Democrats. And so like when these moments happen, it's important to like recognize it, but also like, I don't think we should just abandon optimism altogether. And I do think there's a lot going in our favor. We can get into it more, but I'll just open it up to you guys. Hear what you think.
Yeah. So a couple of comments though, I'd like us to address. So I think they're probably coming from my audience as well, which again, I've had this. Some people have been very upset with me because I will occasionally criticize the Democrats. Now I just want to begin because it's so perplexing to me when I, of all people, have to defend this position. I am an unapologetic partisan. I do not create false equivalents or recognize false equivalents. I do not respect false equivalents. I have enormous contempt for people who create a false equivalence between the Democratic Party and the Republican Party, Joe Biden and Donald Trump. If I think that the Republican Party is 90% of the problem, which is probably a conservative estimate, I spend 90% of the time criticizing the Republican Party. So I don't indulge in this. But yes, occasionally I do criticize the Democratic Party when I think it's appropriate and when I think it's important to recognize these things. So Katie Caddy and a couple of others, or Katie Kitty, says this discussion is moot and unhelpful. A lot of criticism and no helpful analysis or advice. Biden is the candidate. So people can respond to this in this because there's a roundtable of other content creators, not just me. But if you're in my audience, I will say, again, that's why I said when I spoke, this is not a major priority for me. I think that the question needs to be asked by DNC leaders, major people who have influence over the president, to say, hey, listen, do you think it's good for you to move forward? Or do you think you should step aside and have somebody else take the reins? I have gone back for days. My focus has been criticizing the Republicans and defending the Democratic agenda. But we are not a cult. And the fact that this question is being considered, again, I think it needs to be appropriate. I don't think we need to feed. If this is all that Pisco talks about, yes, Pisco is fucked up. If this is all Hutch and I and whoever else, this is not the most important thing, but it is important. And it is a sign of a healthy party that we are asking this question, and it separates us from MAGA.
Well, yeah, I think sorry, I was just going to say with regard to what Kitty is saying, like, it's also just factually incorrect, right? Like, Biden is not the Democratic nominee. We have not had our convention yet. And there's a reason why, we don't schedule our convention in January. Presumably that's because there's some, presumption of election timing and when we might think is optimal to finally decide on a candidate. And so I don't think that's quite right. And I also think that this analysis is pretty helpful, right? I mean, at least, when I think about this decision, I'm thinking relatively empirically, right? I'm not thinking about my personal desires. I mean, the video that I released today talked about how I think Michelle Obama is almost certainly the strategically correct person to be the Democratic nominee in terms of probability to beat Trump. But at the same time, she's almost certainly probably not going to be the nominee. Or how I said, I think Andy Bashir would probably be a strategically strong choice, but he's probably not going to be the choice, for various reasons, right? And so, like Josiah said, we should be able to criticize Biden without feeling like we're shooting ourselves in the foot. This is the same energy as people who said that Bernie was the reason Hillary lost in 2016. That's just not true, right? It's ridiculous to say that, in my opinion. Obviously, Biden was part of a very competitive primary. He ended up winning in 2020. So I really disagree with that sentiment.
I think the latter part of what Kitty said when she said he's the nominee, I think she's correct. I think when we look at the movement that's happening right now, there's various quotes from Democrats serving in Congress and Democratic operatives and donors and blah, blah, blah. But what have we observed since the debate? Obama came out the very next day and affirmed his support for him, linked his campaign website. They raised tens of millions of dollars. I think they hauled like $32 million after that debate. We saw media reports that he huddled with his family on Sunday at Camp David, and we heard from those reports that his family encouraged him to stay in the race. We've seen Hakeem Jeffries affirm his support for him. James Clyburn affirmed his support for him. There's a clip of him going around that's misleading, that's somehow suggesting that he's making the case for Kamala. If you watch the clip, that's not what he's saying. He's saying
he's saying
he wants the ticket
Biden,
to be
right. He says if
exactly.
Biden decides to
Guys,
leave,
same with
signals.
Pelosi. Same with Pelosi. She got up there and they were trying to misquote her as trying to make the case that Biden's not qualified. She said something along the lines of the concerns being valid, but she was making the case that they stay. So I'm not saying, like, regardless of your opinion about whether or not he should stay in the race, all the indicators right now are showing us that he plans to stay in the race. And he came out and just explicitly said so today. I am staying in this race. We can win.
I agree that it's ultimately Biden's choice. And if no one can convince him, then it would be the definition of moot, because I think that it's his to either take or not take. So to the extent that his decision is made up, I hear you, but you guys, you have to look at the signals here. When you see Barack Obama saying what he said in the aftermath there, even Obama's statement is a signal. He doesn't say absolutely Joe Biden is the only one who can be, he has to stay in the race. He doesn't say that. Neither did Hakeem Jeffries' statement say that, or Nancy Pelosi's.
I agree. They're calculated. They're hedged. I agree.
They're openly considered. Those are missiles. Those are attacks on Biden. You have to interpret it the right way. Imagine that you were the candidate and people are talking about, like, yeah, I support Biden. If it were go to the, a primary or whatever, like a mini primary. Those are all open and direct lines of communication to Joe Biden that are undermining him. So you have to read these the right way. Not all of the statements. Some of the statements are explicitly supportive, but even the ones that seem, even his statement today, Biden's own statement, you will not hear a direct statement. Now, again, he might stay in the race. I'm not saying he will, but you can be damn sure that until the decision is made, you will not hear an explicit decision from him.
I don't agree with you. Why don't I just read Obama's tweet? Okay. Bad debate nights happen. Trust me, I know. But this election is still a choice between someone who has fought for ordinary folks his entire life and someone who only cares about himself. Between someone who tells the truth, who knows right from wrong, and will give it to the American people straight, and someone who lies through his teeth for his own benefit. Last night didn't change that. It's why so much is at stake in November.
Well, but
none of that is absolutely he's going to stay in the race. It's so preposterous. People would say, leave. He's a Democratic nominee. He could have said that, and he didn't. Because
I think
there's reports that Obama has the opposite opinion. And I believe them. I believe they're leaking them.
Look, to be fair, Obama did. If I'm not mistaken, actually, I think Pisco's more correct about Obama's true opinion being more skeptical of a Biden nomination. To be fair, Obama told Biden not to run in 2016. That's one of the reasons why he didn't run in 2016.
And what about that?
And it seemed like he was pretty chill on Biden running even in 2020, deferring to people like, Beto O'Rourke. Like, he personally met with Beto and Kamala Harris and people like this. Now, forget about all that. At the end of the day, Obama's tweet was, I think it was like the day after, or maybe the night of the presidential debate, and that was
was the morning
before we
after.
had right, and that was before we had this incredibly broad, open
Push.
skepticism of
Yeah.
Biden being the nominee. Because don't get me wrong, there was some of that the night of with people asking about Gavin Newsom and things like that. But it seems like the liberal left-wing media has all taken this story and ran with it. There's huge leaks coming out about major donors starting to switch sides. Not necessarily switch sides, but basically say like we really want a different candidate. People are making plays. Take Clyburn's quote, for instance. I get what you're saying, Hutch, but I think that Clyburn doesn't say there's no world where Biden is a strong candidate with the Democratic Party behind him, where Clyburn says, if Kamala was the option, I'd support her. Right? Because why would you say that? Right?
It's an
There's no
attack
reason
on
to say
Joe
that.
Biden. It's an absolute
Right.
attack.
I think no. I think like I don't think they have a choice. Like I don't think that it would be helpful at all for them to deny that the debate was bad. And so in remembering that they can't just like they can't just dismiss people's concerns because that's going to make the situation worse, I think. And so
No, I understand that,
for
but
Clyburn to come out and say like the question was, what is your response going to be if the party jumps over the first black female president and tries to pick somebody else? And he said in that conditional situation that would be a mistake. But he said, I want the ticket to be Biden and Kamala.
That's not the answer Joe Biden wants. The answer Joe Biden would want if he's staying in the race is that is such a ridiculous question. Joe Biden's the nominee. There's no passing up because it's not going to happen. And no one in the Democratic Party is going to suggest to the president that he leave. It's his nomination. He won it. And this is a stupid question. So I'm not even going to consider it. That's the answer that if you were a Joe Biden always fan, you would, but people are going to hear what Clyburn says. Some people will interpret it like you, and I think that that's fine. People can interpret that way, and you know what? I am going to say you might even be right. My interpretation might be wrong, but my interpretation of that statement is, if I'm Biden hearing that, I'm upset. I'm upset that Clyburn said that.
The last thing I'll say on this, because especially if we're only going to have Peace go for an hour, I do want to turn to the Supreme Court decision very soon. The last thing I'll say on it again, because I see the comments in chat again to clarify. Biden has been an objectively good president, and Joe Biden on his worst day, let me put it like this. The caricature of Joe Biden, which is being painted by Republicans on that guy's worst day, he is objectively better as the chief executive, head of state, head of government, commander-in-chief of the United States Armed Forces for this country than Donald Trump on his best day. There is no one in this chat right now who does not support Joe Biden if Joe Biden is the Democratic nominee. I will not apologize, and I don't think anybody here should, for having questions or wanting the question to be considered and discussed by the appropriate parties. Again, as far as I'm concerned at this point, this many days removed from the debate, Peace go full disclosure, this is not something like, this is another reason I don't want to talk about this 3 weeks into I have made my opinion known, and now this is for the big wigs to litigate.
I get you.
So I'm just saying, for example, like this is what I mean. But I will not apologize for us behaving like a healthy political party. And the last thing I'll say is I agree that the endorsements of President Biden post-debate could be much more full-throated than what they are. I do think I don't know if it's an attack, but I do think it's a hedge by people in the event that the president makes a different choice. He has publicly come out and said that he is in the race. Now we have 4 months to course correct. Is it possible? Sure. But and I also just want to say it's not about one debate. The president was behind collectively in the polls more often than not. I know a lot of people don't like the polls, but Biden's team polls. There's a reason that the president's campaign polls. And I mean this with love, again, to people in my audience. When they say ignore the polls, that's insane. No strategist, no career politician, including the ones that the president himself employs because he recognizes the need, ignores the polls. All the polls say, though, it gives an indicator in time. There is time to change this. It's just going to be really tough. Okay. So that's the last thing I say.
But on that front, though, if we're going to talk about polls, I agree with you. You shouldn't ignore polls. I think that would be silly. And I'm not going to take what I have to say next to the extent that Trump took it in 2016 and 2020, where it's like the polls are fake. It's all fake news. They just make up the numbers. Mm-hmm. But it is undeniably a fact that the polls have been underestimating Democrats consistently all over the fucking country for 2.5 years by not insignificant margins. I don't think pointing to the Fetterman-Oz debate is necessarily an appropriate comparison. Obviously, this debate is going to have way more scrutiny. It's going to be discussed on the national level. It's all people are going to be talking about for a week. However, when we look at that was his debate with Oz was really bad. And the polls predicted that he was going to lose by 5 points, and he won by 2 points. And his story is not isolated. That story has been replicated in conservative states all over the country. It's been replicated in blue states all over the country, which is why this is something that I think it's really important to remember, where it's like, okay, pay attention to the polls. We can kind of like use them to sort of roughly gauge where we're at. I think it's a mistake to just ignore the discrepancy that's been consistent now. That's not to say get complacent. I do agree, like we're on the back foot right now, but I think there's perfectly logical, valid, historically established reasons to be somewhat skeptical that Republicans are as strong as the polls are suggesting they are right now.
Supreme Court.
Boy, last word for you if you want it.
I want a last word too.
Okay. Yeah, my last word. I just, honestly, again, I just don't. I can't look at the strong depth chart of the Democratic Party and genuinely say Biden it must be the strongest candidate. I just can't imagine that. We have so many good Democrats who could be the Democratic nominee, including Kamala Harris. I mean, she would be a strong nominee, a much stronger nominee, including, in theory, politically unaffiliated people currently like Michelle Obama. And so I just think that there's so many great options for, for the country and obviously for the Democratic Party. And of course, for in terms of the probability of defeating Trump, all of Biden's campaign money becomes whoever the nominee's campaign money is. Most likely, I can't imagine Biden would just be like, oh yeah, I'm just going to keep this $250 million in my own campaign account. Like that'd be pretty surprising if he did that. Yeah, I mean, that's why I would say that we would probably be better off if Biden dropped out of the race. The speculation that I think mostly that Hutch is giving and that I would give as well, I'm just not sure if he will, right? Like, I don't know.
Wait a minute. Can we just say on the campaign fundraising thing, as a point of clarification, my understanding was it was impossible for the Biden-Harris campaign funding, not DNC funding, Biden-Harris campaign funding to go to anyone other than Joe Biden and Kamala Harris. That was my understanding.
I read an article about it today. It would be dependent on if she was at the top of the ticket. If somebody else, if the party coalesced around a different candidate around the convention or whatever, those funds would be released to that candidate. It's not like she would just be permanently tied to it. That was my understanding of the article.
Okay. I read the exact opposite, so I'm glad that's being clarified. Okay.
I don't know the answer to that. Heads up. I don't know, but I don't really care because, and I'm being frank with all you folks, I think the free media that you would get from a new candidate is worth that. Like, it's going to be worth millions and you're going to have so many eyes on the situation. It's going to be the biggest news story in political history. What's going to happen. And so I don't really see the one, like, it's a cost that I recognize, but it's one I'm willing to bear. I have to reiterate, I think this president has been the best president in my lifetime. I think that Joe Biden has done exceptionally. He prevented Donald Trump in 2020. He will always be remembered for that. But we cannot think emotionally. We can obviously have a moment. It might not happen that he steps down, and if you are not able to have that conversation because it's too much or something like that, like, then remove yourself from it. Or if you think that it's not a productive conversation for you to engage in, you don't have to have that conversation. What's that?
I was just going to say real quick, just to clarify, I looked on NBC News. If Harris did not become the nominee under this scenario where Biden drops out, the Campaign Legal Center's campaign finance team noted that Biden's campaign money could be converted into a political action committee, but a PAC can only make small maximum donation of $3,300 per election to another candidate. The Biden campaign could also refund donors' contributions who in turn could donate to a new candidate. So I'm just saying,
they find a way. They do something with it.
I'm reading that it's not like just drag the money and drop it over.
Yeah, check some boxes, do some things.
Yeah.
To Bisco's point, there's no way that whoever the Democratic nominee could be Donald Duck, and it's going to raise $1 billion, right? I mean, it's probably not going to be the case that whoever the Democratic nominee is has a lack of money to run a proper and effective campaign.
Guys, that's part of my money. I donated to Joe Biden. Okay,
I donated from the night of the debate.
I recognize that I donated before that. that this is a big deal. I have not. Think about this. You have 4 people on this panel. All 4 of us have been stalwart Biden defenders about his legacy, about his actions. All 4 of us. 2 of us have said that we think that it'd be better if he stepped down. One of them is kind of ambiguous about it. The other, I think, more leaning towards maybe he should stay on, or maybe that's already been decided. That should tell you something. We're not here to just like bash Biden. We're trying to take the correct action. We're trying to help. And I think it's healthy. I think it's important. And if you think the conversation is dangerous, like I also think that not having the conversation is dangerous. There's no riskless situation either on the meta or the substantive decision. And so you have to think about everything collectively, holistically. 80% of the country thinks he's unfit in terms of mentally, something approaching that, maybe 70, maybe 65. Almost half of registered Democrat voters say he shouldn't run. Those are big numbers. And I don't say it's impossible for him to win if he stays as a nominee. I don't say that. I'm going to fight for him if he does. But you should consider that.
I respect you. I respect your opinion. You're obviously an intelligent guy, and your insight before has been, impressive. I also think I think we do need to have like some space for a little bit of optimism in this moment. Like even in a moment like this, I think it is important to note that the Donald Trump era of politics and what he did to the electorate has been profound, not just for his own party, but for the left-wing movement. There are millions and millions and millions of voters that will drag themselves through hot coals and glass to vote against him. And not just against him, against the Republican Party for what they've done with these abortion bans all over the country. These people are highly engaged with politics in ways that they were not before. Many of them speak up in any of our chats if you have become permanently engaged in politics because of this moment. And so we're going to show up in November and support the candidate. We're going to vote. And anybody saying that Biden is out of this race, that this race is over, I think you're looking. I think you're being too reactive to the moment, which, to be clear, is a painful, uncomfortable moment. But let's have this conversation in a month. I think all of us are maybe forgetting a little bit that Americans, especially in the modern era, especially in the era of social media, have profoundly short attention spans.
Sure.
And we have no idea what conversation is going to be dominating the discourse in a month from now.
Sure.
Never underestimate Donald Trump's ability to fucking step on his own feet.
And that's why I'm going to transition to say, because that was the other thing too. That's the other reason why I think that we're in a moment right now where the Republican Party and its allies and right-wing media, not just conventional media, Fox News, OAN, Newsmax, but also alternate media, the Daily Wire, and the Daily Wire's constituent creators, because it functions as a conglomerate, but they also do their own things as individuals. They have enormous followings. Tim Pool, Steven Crowder, Jordan Peterson, Piers Morgan, Lex Friedman comment on it too. There is an incentive structure in right-wing media which dwarfs left-wing media colossally. Econoboy and Pisco and I were just arguing with Destiny, or having a conversation with Destiny about various things. Destiny is dwarfed. Like the lowest person on the right-wing major totem pole, they get more views than Destiny, right? That's how outmatched we are in terms of reach. Then you have the mainstream media. The mainstream media, as I've said before, I have no doubt that their reporters vote Democrat, but they will gleefully throw Democrats under the bus, and I have proven it time and time again. It's an objective fact. Anyone who disagrees is wrong. I am right. They are wrong. They will throw Democrats under the bus for the sake of clicks.
There's
CNN,
no loyalty there.
No loyalty. CNN, Jake Tapper, the New York Times, the Atlantic, Vox, it doesn't matter. Either based because they genuinely believe in the principle that they're calling balls and strikes, even if it's uncomfortable for Democrats, or in the case of the New York Times, because they have a grudge against whatever. They will part with the Democratic candidate on a dime compared to the right-wing media with Republicans. So with all of that in mind, I think it's important not to participate in a feedback loop. We've all made our concerns known. At the end of the day, the question needs to be litigated among the movers and the shakers. And then this is the transition. In terms of why it is so important to defeat Donald Trump, I think we've been given another goddamn reason in the form of this case here, Trump v. United States. So, folks, this is huge. And I'd love to give, I mean, Pisco's a lawyer. I obviously want to hear the most from him, but I think Econoboy and Hutch, I've not had a chance to hear your takes on this, but how do you feel about this? For context, viewers, this is this recent Supreme Court decision, which has granted sweeping immunity to the President of the United States, such that, in my opinion, it effectively makes them a God King. Hutch, what do you think about
judicial
this?
enabling act, as Pisco called it.
Yeah. Hutch, what's your thoughts?
I defer to people that are more informed on the law about this stuff. I do know that I follow a lot of lawyers, like people that I consider to be like fair in their analysis. They're not super partisan. Like even if they're left wing, they usually give accurate takes. And I remember at the time that the case was being argued, basically everybody I followed scoffed and mocked the SEAL Team 6 thing. And so my understanding is that this is a surprise, but yeah, I'm here to listen to Pisco on this one for sure.
Thank you guys. I super appreciate that you guys recognize that it's an impressively broad set of immunities given to the president under this ruling, and that the worst possible fears, both about the court as an institution and their potential ruling in this case, have been confirmed. I expected the court to kind of have an Amy Coney Barrett style concurrence as the majority opinion, with like Roberts and Amy Coney Barrett writing and the liberals dissenting as to some and concurring as to some, and then having the four more MAGA wing justices sort of ruling and dissenting on like the most extreme versions of it. But to see the majority under Roberts write such a breathtakingly incorrect decision, number one, and absolutely disgraceful in terms of incentive structures, which is kind of the basis of the opinion, decision, is so disheartening, so discrediting, so beyond the pale. Everyone who tells you that the SEAL Team 6 hypotheticals, the military coup hypotheticals aren't on the table, are lying to you. The court, just to give you a brief overview, gives kind of 3 different categories of potential situations where there might be different levels of immunity. For quote unquote unofficial acts, no immunity, right? And that's their way of saying, see, everyone's equal because, you know, you're all liable for your unofficial acts. Well, guess what? You know, you're also liable for your official acts if you're on the job. Like, you don't get an immunity if you're like a bartender, or if you're like a rogue government employee, you do something bad on the job related to your job. But put that aside. So you have the unofficial acts, the kind of core powers, the other end of the spectrum, the core executive powers. Those are absolutely immune. You don't even inquire as to the power. You don't even inquire any situation as to whether or not it can be misused, because in its nature, it cannot be questioned. And then in the middle are all other official powers, and they're presumptively immune unless you meet some super high threshold for the government to show that it makes no burden on the executive power, which is essentially, for all cases, intents and purposes, a kind of practical immunity for most things. And it does give the Supreme Court, it's assuming and taking control of the power here to decide what is and what's not core executive in a very kind of apparent way.
Does this opinion solidify the unitary executive theory?
100% it does. It says the president is a branch unto himself in just a line, right? Like, there's no discussion about it. That's a incredibly big ruling, right? That undermines other cases related to the potential for having insulated independent agencies, to say all like kind of level of things pertaining to executive power. It is a super broad ruling. And to give you a sense of like, all right, let's apply this to some situations, right? They describe a core executive power as the ability for the president to communicate to the Department of Justice on issues related to prosecution, right? There's no text that says it's core executive. Where do they find the constitutional basis to say it's core executive? Well, they point to the take care clause. That is a clause that says that the president shall take care that the law be faithfully executed. Wow, that's broad, right? So take care clause means all conversations are core executive with your Department of Justice related to prosecutions. Okay. So why doesn't it apply to anything else, right? The core executive, if the take care clause is a part of that, then wow, a lot of things can be construed as taking care of the laws be faithfully executed in the mind of the president. Because remember, there is no intent, there is no motive you can look into. It's the nature of the power. So you can't look to bad faith. You can't look to a sham rationale. And then the other basis for saying that these communications are protected is because of the general removal power. Well, the removal power, I don't know, is first of all not based in the Constitution. It's kind of like an implicit nature of the presidency. It's a judicially crafted power that is kind of implicit in the fact that he can appoint, he can also remove. But put that aside, the removal applies to like every executive officer. It's unclear, like, okay, so why doesn't every communication under the executive branch apply for this? But you don't even put that aside for a second, right? We know that a core executive power of the president is commander-in-chief, is law enforcement. Based on the unitary executive theory that this opinion supports, the executive branch only has its power, all the subordinates, because of the president, because he is the branch unto himself. Conceptually, there can't be a power that members of the executive branch have that the president himself doesn't have. It's by virtue of his office that authority is given in the first place. And so I 100% believe that if the president were to exercise his authority as commander-in-chief to designate someone like a foreign terrorist and blow them up, well, you can't look into whether it's a sham. You can't look into their motive. You can't look into their intent. You can't really look into any factual circumstances related to anything tangentially, an executive power. You can't use that as evidence. So the power itself seems to be in the core of what the president does, and you can't question it. Of course, that would allow a SEAL Team 6 hypothetical. And this is the last thing I'll say and let you guys come in. The court doesn't even address the hypotheticals presented. Sotomayor presents those hypotheticals. The court references them and says, "Oh, she's being histrionic." They don't actually say that, but they essentially say she's being histrionic. This is so crazy. How could you ever? But they don't actually answer them. And what they say instead is like, what's more likely than that, factually, right? What's more likely is that the executive is going to be chilled. That's a concession, folks. That's a concession that, like, yeah, those things are probably core executive, and yeah, it would be bad to have a military coup, but we don't think that's very likely.
Yeah, so a couple of things here. There are people with questions for you. Could you ask Pisco to differentiate between presumptive immunity and absolute immunity with examples, please?
Yeah, it's a great question. So because the court doesn't give us a good standard, and that's why the dissent kind of goes after them and says, well, what's the standard for determining whether something core executive? So one part of the answer is there's not a good doctrinal historical basis to separate them, but you could think they give some examples, right, of things that are like very essential to what it is to be the president. I can't really describe it more than that, but like the examples I use are like the pardon power and the power to veto legislation and the power, like those are kind of the core executive. But remember, in this case, something that they've ruled on, that they've said is core executive, is his decision, his communications to the Department of Justice in the context of the fact pattern here. And so if communications to the Department of Justice are core executive, that's super, super broad. An example of presumptive are these, one, the communications to the vice president about whether he wants to not certify the result of the election. That's presumptive because, well, the vice president could be acting in his capacity as president of the Senate, as a legislative member of the legislative branch. And so therefore, we're not going to say it's core executive because discussions about that authority might be like not executive. It could be legislative.
Well, how could a president justify, say, for example, like the scheme that Trump endeavored to carry out with the false slates of electors? He doesn't have a constitutional role in deciding these elections. That has nothing to do with his
doesn't matter. He has a constitutional role in directing the Department of Justice, and since he has a constitutional role in directing the Department of Justice, you can't look into why he's directing it into a particular
the motive of what he was corresponding with the Justice Department for is irrelevant. It is you have no authority to probe it. So my understanding, Pisco, as a layman, you correct me if I'm wrong, even if the purpose of the correspondence is by any conventional definition unlawful, it's moot because you can't probe or examine the correspondence in the first place.
Yeah, you can't look to the motive or the intent or the nature of. Maybe you could look at a high level, like, oh, is this a communication about prosecution, or is this a communication? Although query whether or not why that is a distinction that matters. But like, say that you can even analyze it on that under that high level, as long as you can give a pro forma reason, right? Like, this was a conversation about enforcement generally, and so I include some sentence about it, and so I can technically say it's related to that. You can think of the kind of hypotheticals where you could embed private like kind of incentives into a memo or something that on its face has a purported formal reason. And as to your question about the sort of the state electors, because that's separate from the DOJ, is that kind of your question, Hutch?
Yeah, I mean, like Rudy Giuliani obviously didn't work for the DOJ. Same with Sidney Powell. So how does that?
Think about this, right? The court doesn't decide whether or not the president's authority, or remember, core executive authority, or I don't know, the presumptive authority related to his bully pulpit authority, right? What's a bully pulpit? The bully pulpit is this notion the president, part of his duties is to talk to the country. Think about that. And so his conversations with Rudy Giuliani, or conversations to slates of fake electors, those might be an exercise of the bully pulpit power. So now you're saying that any conceivable conversation with anybody might be a fucking presidential official duty?
And, so this is where I'll bring Conaway. And Conaway, correct me if I'm wrong, but didn't Will Scharf go on the record to say the collection of the so-called fake electors, they are going to argue that is an application of an official act by the president? Isn't that what they told CNN?
Yep, they did. So I mean, that's one of the scary things about this ruling in general, is that, and this actually goes to Justice Jackson. Actually, she dissented in a recent abortion case ruling with regards to I think like reinstating an injunction on a really restrictive Idaho abortion law. One of the logics that she gave was that it's damaging to release this decision such as we did, because we're not really giving any sort of finality to the issue, right? We're just kicking the can down the road. And maybe on this specific abortion issue in Idaho, it's not like the most consequential decision in the grand scheme of things. I mean, in the sense of like how many people live in Idaho, and how many people does this really affect? Obviously, it's still a bad thing, and I agree with Justice Jackson. But with regards to this issue specifically, it's like, well, now we have, we're staring down the barrel of electing a new president who is obviously quite authoritarian and fascistic in his rhetoric and actions, who is obviously going to test the absolute limit of this new power and this new immunity that he is given. And we as the American people are just sort of stuck in this limbo, while we might have a despot taking office trying to enact authoritarian policies. And the courts just kind of have to figure out what's an official act. And then guess what? Even if they figure that out, doesn't matter, because the Supreme Court can just overrule them anyway and say, well, it turns out that is an official act.
Yeah,
so we're kind of stuck in the middle here.
I was going to say, just real quick, something I can add to this too, just to clarify about the absolute immunity versus presumptive. I just want to read this here. This is the standard that the majority imposes. At a minimum, the president must be immune from prosecution for an official act unless the government can show that applying a criminal prohibition to that act would pose no dangers of intrusion on the authority and functions of the executive branch. None. In other words, unless the government can show, hey, literally prosecuting the president for this poses no threat, literally none, not a teensy tiny, not asymptotically, literally no threat to the president's authority, they must be immune. So
what
as
does
Justice
that even mean, right?
Right.
Okay, so I can't think of a single thing he could do that might not have maybe potentially some implication. Correct. Like it's so generic and broad, and no one understands. Everyone in the country is going to disagree on what will or will not be some effect on the executive function.
Right.
So you understand everyone who's telling you that, oh, don't worry, he's going to, whatever, unofficial acts are covered. You have no clue what is going to be unofficial, what's going to be official,
right? And
the extent to which, even if it is official, what is going to satisfy this test? What will actually satisfy it?
And again, like something we have to keep pressing home when it comes to this ruling is that you can't get back the damage in the transition, right? You can never get that back. And so whoever the next president is who might take advantage of this power, who might do things like, I use the example of like full forensic investigations of all financials and all personal dealings that all of their political opponents have, And then all of a sudden, it turns out they're not committing crimes, but maybe they're cheating on their wife, or maybe they have some scandal that nobody knows about that's uncovered because of all these wiretaps. Maybe they said something uncouth during a wiretap that was a private conversation. All that stuff gets leaked. And all of a sudden, even if the court somehow rules that that's completely illegal and there's no way the president can do it, well, we still have a political opposition that's been one-sidedly decimated by the power of the state, right? And this is where, it's comparisons to Hungarian democracy, where it's not that Hungary, it's not that people in Hungary, it's not that Orban is literally a dictator, but when you can use the tools of the state to swing the balance in your favor in an undue way, that's where you end up with sort of this true sense of manufactured consent and people who are able to stay in power because of the power that they had previously, right? And not because of necessarily the message that they're selling to the American people. And that's what's especially so dangerous about this. Even if the court rules completely that, unofficial acts is a very narrow thing, or official acts is a very narrow thing, and unofficial acts is a very broad thing, we still have to deal with all that transition time, right? Which is a very scary thought.
I do want to get to, I was going to say, I do want to get, before Pisco leaves, I do want to get to like potential remedies, because I think that that conversation is obviously super important. It needs to happen. My opinion is that, the obvious remedies here would be, like, people ask, I don't know about you guys, but in my chat, like, what can be done about this? Well, really, it's up to Congress to shape the judiciary as they see fit. It's not up to the president. And when we consider this, I don't think it makes a lot of sense for Biden right now to get up there and say, hey, we should expand the court, or we should impeach this justice or that justice or whatever, because it's just not going to happen right now. Obviously, the Republicans control the House. And so if he gets up there and says we should expand the court, first of all, it's not going to happen. And second of all, they're going to turn around and use that as propaganda. They're going to say, well, look, he's a tyrant. And it's going to work on a lot of median voters. So I think Biden needs like his soldiers in Congress out there making that case for him. And I think that he should probably not opine on this at all.
So Hutch, I do want to weigh in on this, because the president, he gave, I don't know if you were able to catch this, but he gave a speech. It was about 5 minutes. It was really good. He said he obviously disagrees with this decision. He said he will still respect the previous limitations of the presidency, even if others do not, even if the court doesn't. Here's what I'll tell you. I would need to see polling on this, but I will tell you that Supreme Court reform is wildly popular. It is popular. And the Supreme Court itself as an institution is wildly unpopular. I would need to carefully consider about whether or not I want Biden in his current political predicament to assume the risk in terms of opining on the court. But I will say, just as a point, and I told you so to people in the audience or anyone else in this panel who disagreed at previous points, this decision, in my opinion, is an utter vindication of my belief that the Supreme Court in its current composition is the ultimate problem in terms of democratizing this country. The president and the office of the presidency may be the immediate problem given its agility and now its unfettered power. But even in this ruling, the Supreme Court gives itself some back doors. They will be the ultimate arbiter of what is presumptive versus absolute, what is official versus unofficial. They get to hold the president's leash in this respect. So the court has to change. It does have to change. As far as I'm concerned, that there is no good faith argument to the contrary. It's a matter of what changes and how we go about affecting. So I take your point that maybe Biden shouldn't be campaigning on it, but I actually do think somebody needs to, because I think it's popular and I think it would energize the base that, hey, we're not just going to wag our fingers at this court anymore. You give us the numbers and we will crush this court. We will impose our will on this court. We will remind the court that the founders wanted it to be the weakest branch, weaker than Congress, and yes, weaker than the president. Important, yes, but not a top-down relationship. And I think that that has to be done.
Well, I have to bounce in a minute. I'm conscious of that, but
sure.
I appreciate everyone's statements here. I mean, I've been in favor of expanding the court since 2017, and since they took away the opportunity for Garland to get a hearing and a vote. And so you don't need to convince me on that. I'm fine in this context, considering things that you could do to combat this ruling, which is so far beyond like any, and we haven't even gone into like the basis of the ruling. It's preposterous. There's no textual basis. There's no history. There's nothing. So the substance of like why they came to the decision is almost even worse than the decision itself. I would say almost, because the decision itself is actually worse because it's of its import. But I think the rationale to get there is horrible. And so I'm open to suggestions. I think that like we should expand the court. Failing that, like I would support a constitutional amendment to change this. Good luck with that. Good luck with the court expansion. And so right now, all we can do is vote for a Democratic president and get some retirements and get changed personnel. That right now is the
a Democratic Senate. That's the other thing.
And a Democratic Senate. And if you don't think that's necessary, you're just like not reading the tea leaves.
Let me ask you before you leave, and everybody ask their questions of Pisco before he has to dip. What about my hypothetical that Biden is reelected, but Republicans take the Senate? Do you foresee any scenario, not just in his final year, but in any of the 4 years of his second term, that a Republican Senate would let him fill a vacancy?
No, even if you would have someone like Susan Collins willing to vote for it, or Mitt Romney or something, vote for them, it doesn't matter because the Senate Majority Leader is going to not even put it up for a vote.
Yeah,
because so it's not a. Do not think if you have a Republican Senate, you are not going to get any Democratic. You might not even get any judicial nominees through, but certainly
hang on. Let's clarify. Can Hutch weigh in on this too? I just want to be very clear. I'm not saying if there's a vacancy, if Biden wins, there's a Republican Senate, and then there's a vacancy in his final year. They've already set that precedent. I'm saying 6 months into Biden's second term.
One day, it doesn't matter. They're not going to do it. Yes, if you don't believe that if in day one of the Biden administration there is a vacancy and he nominates someone, that the Republicans control the Senate. And if you actually think that there's a even 1% chance that they'll put them up for a vote, you are smoking crack pipes.
We're not even talking about strictly just the Supreme Court either. We're talking about the entire federal bench.
I think it's
we crossed that Rubicon. We crossed that Rubicon years ago. I don't think the current Republican Party would hesitate for a moment to keep every single vacancy open.
Just to be clear, when Biden won in 2020 and the Georgia Senate elections were not decided, so it was kind of a 48-50, let's see if Democrats can get the 50-50 split, Mitch McConnell wouldn't even commit to confirming Biden's nominees for the executive, right? Yeah. He wouldn't even commit to letting votes on like Secretary of State and defense, Secretary of Defense, things like this. What he committed to was, well, if they're centrists, which means, well, if they're former Republicans that Mitch McConnell personally approves of, maybe I'll let a vote on them on the Senate floor. And even then they'll get, it'll be a 50-50 with Harris breaking the tie split, right? So I mean, these guys are totally bad faith, obviously.
They are horrible bad faith bastards. And I mean, it's really, really important to maintain the Senate. It's tough given this map, but that's the stakes here.
Definitely
I don't think it's impossible, but I'm just that's why I'm here.
And the rest of us will carry on after you go. We'll talk about it. But does anybody else have anything for Pisco?
Listen, my Supreme Jury idea gains momentum by the day. All right, and I refuse to let that idea die. Get rid of the Supreme Court, replace it with a Supreme Jury. Okay.
We'll see. Much love, everybody. Bye.
Bye, Pisco.
Yeah, I agree with you, Josiah. When you're talking about the radical reforms that are needed for the court. I do think that you need to be, you only really get, I mean, like if you fuck that up, if you swing and you miss, you're talking about putting that on ice for possibly 2 decades. I looked it up now. I can't find any polling that there is polling that shows that Americans are unhappy with the Supreme Court. I can't find any polling that shows that Americans right now have the appetite to pack the court. Which is sad. I mean, I believe it's necessary. I believe that became necessary the day they decided they weren't going to let Obama seat his justice. We just have to be really smart about it. I agree. There should be members of Congress that are speaking up about it. There should be Democratic operatives that are speaking up about it. There is no upside currently to Biden getting up there and pushing that and saying, like, if I get elected, I want to do this. I don't think that would be smart for him to do it. I see a ton of like progressives and super lefties that are complaining, well, he's not even going to do anything. He says he doesn't want to pack the court. Well, it's like, even if he wanted to, I'm sure he has advisors that are telling him, like, don't say that publicly right now. There is no upside to it. If somebody could explain to me what the benefit would be for him to come out in favor of it now,
well,
I'm all ears.
I don't have my sources on hand, but I'll dig them up. I maybe a Conaboy in his master SCOTUS file. I thought SDL put some polling together. Maybe you've got that on command.
Well, you can look at the Supreme Court approval, just the approval rating of the Supreme Court, even pre this decision, right? So I think one of the things to keep in mind, Hutch, is that any political analysis with regards to the polling is not including this decision that was just made. I mean, we haven't had, months of a Democratic messaging campaign about just how disastrous this ruling is, right? I mean, look at what happened after the Dobbs decision and look at how that impacted the popularity of the court. I think that I would agree probably that I don't know if this would be an effective primary piece of Biden's messaging, but what I will say is that I think it would be effective insofar as I don't think people would vote against Biden purely because of saying he wants to, add justices to the court or do ethics reform to the court or whatever that is, especially because that message is fundamentally rooted in the idea that, look, I'm doing this because the president's not a dictator, right? And so if you vote for us democratically and you vote for us on this platform, we will do this. And I think certainly it's very motivating for the Democratic base of voters to do this at that point. So I'm not sure if it would be a bad piece to add into the campaign.
Don't you think it would make more sense to wait until 2022 or I'm sorry, not 2026 or 2028?
No, unfortunately, I really don't think so, Hutch. And the reason I say that is because Democrats, unfortunately, elected Democrats, especially in the Senate, have just acquiesced to this court for so long. And here's the issue. I think fundamentally is what you're saying.
But that is the issue, though.
Hold on, because here's the issue exactly with what you're saying, and I'll link the two, is if Biden wins in 2024, the same stupid centrist Democrat, and he never says anything about reforming the court, the same stupid centrist Democrats who didn't think you needed to do something about this in the first place will say, well, Biden's president. What's the point? It's a controversial issue. It's a polarizing issue. Guys, stop being bitches. You have to do something about this. The goddamn court just ruled that the president can be a dictator. You can't just say, oh, it's politically polarizing. Like, at a certain point, we need to have a backing in the Democratic Party for doing something serious about this court. And if Biden just stays silent on it, I just don't know if that exists if he wins the election.
Being right isn't necessarily being smart if you're talking about these things. I think it's smart to reform the court. I think it's just a no-brainer if you're a Democrat looking to the next fucking 20 years and you have any kind of aspirations of progressive policy. It's like throw that right out the window with this court. And so it's just obviously necessary. But
you can be right.
But here's the situation with the Senate. Okay, so for all the viewers to understand what the math is right now. The best case scenario for Democrats, and they can do it, like even with everything that's happened in the last week, I believe that a Dem trifecta is possible in November. I firmly believe that. That's not cope. I truly believe that that's possible. But the best case scenario for Democrats in the Senate right now is a 50-50. We are 1,000% going to lose one seat. And it all comes down to Montana and Ohio. We have to win both of those races and we will have a 50-50 Senate. That Senate is not going to pack the court. It's just not. We just need to be honest about that. It isn't going to pack the court. And so if we start pushing for these kinds of things now, when there is no realistic sort of path to it right now, then I think we're just setting ourselves up to fail, and we're setting the Republican media apparatus to jump on that and like hyenas.
The only thing that I'll say to what you're saying, Hutch, is that I agree with what you're saying, that the 50-50 Senate that we're envisioning in a Biden second term is not likely presently to pack the court. My calculus is just that if Biden, if he really goes for it in terms of this messaging, I think that it leads to those guys feeling a bit more pressure to support this, especially if he makes it part of the campaign. I mean, because to me as well, this is an emergency situation, right? Like at a certain point, you don't care about the political popularity of, responding to your nation getting attacked, for example. You just have to respond, right? There's no poll that you can look at in that regard. So I'm making a political calculus as well. I don't think this issue is number one in people's mind enough to cost Biden the election. But I think what it could do is it could, if he runs on that messaging, say, look, I won an election on this. This was part of our platform. The day that another Republican wins office because Trump's running again in 2028, boys, you're all going to fucking prison. We actually really have to pass some sort of narrow reform that allows us to add seats to the court and then limit their appellate jurisdiction.
But it is not going to happen.
Well, wait a minute. Wait a minute.
It could happen.
Well, wait a minute. I don't know. I don't know if I agree with you, Hutch, because the two figures in the Democratic Party that immediately come to mind in terms of thwarting progressive reform are not going to be there next term, come hell or high water. Manchin's out, and so is Sinema. And I'm not saying that they're the only obstacles, but they were the ones by far, I think, most likely to thwart things like court reform. Now, in the aftermath of Dobbs, Chevron, and this Trump decision, Biden and more progressive advocates, and really Biden's not even one of them. Biden, I think, is probably getting closer and closer and closer to court reform, but he's such an institutionalist. But more progressive advocates like Bernie Sanders and AOC can go to the president and say, Mr. President, we barely squeaked by this election, defeating Trump. But you will not be president in 4 years, and a Republican might. And if we don't change this court in 4 years to reverse the ruling that gave presidents God emperor status, you will, in your negligence, in your fecklessness, in your cowardice as an institutionalist, be granting that power to Republicans. So how about we make a good faith, aggressive effort to make it to the American people and say, listen, you all hate this court, and the polling shows it. You guys hate this court. They've taken away your reproductive liberty. They have gutted the EPA and all these regulatory agents. It's going to be harder for you to have clean drinking water, all this shit. And now they are making it so that the next guy who gets in office, assuming it's a Republican, is basically a monarch. And I think that there is a good chance that they will act on this court because we haven't tried. Like, I take your point that we haven't done it yet, but it also hasn't been a central thrust of the Democratic Party. We don't know because we haven't tried. And I think there's ample fodder, there's ample material to make the case, especially in light of the past 2 weeks with the Chevron and Trump decision. So what do you make of that? That the court has now overstepped such, because of their unpopularity, because of their recent decisions, because of Dobbs, the threat of an emboldened GOP president in the future, that Democrats could make a decision.
There's a few things to unpack there. I think the first thing to say would be that the Supreme Court itself being unpopular does not necessarily translate to support for packing the court. So we need to, like, it's true. The Supreme Court approval numbers are abysmally low, like the lowest that they've been in modern history. I think they're in the 20s. Okay, that does not necessarily translate to packing the court. The second thing to consider is that when think tanks like the Heritage Foundation and the Republican Project envisioned reshaping the judiciary to serve their interests, they were conceiving of these plans back in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s. They've been at this for decades. And so I think on a certain level, Democratic voters need to make peace with the fact that it may take some time to unwind this stuff. And I understand the urgency. I really do. I really, really do.
Can we acknowledge, though, because this is where I'm frustrated. It's because conservatives had the foresight to make this an issue for decades. And maybe I'm misunderstanding you respectfully, but it's almost like you're saying, don't make it a priority. We need to be talking about. We need to, like.
No. Of course, the Democrats do need to be like, this is a conversation that should be happening loudly and forcefully in Congress. I agree with you there. That's where the conversation is supposed to happen. If Biden himself comes out to do it, I think that's a strategic error. You're talking about the next Congress possibly being open to packing the court. And I think that is fanciful, idealistic, naive thinking, to respectfully speaking, of course.
It's low probability.
FDR had way bigger majorities, and his Congress told him, no, you cannot expand the court. You're asking for a Congress, a 50-50 Congress in 2024 to vote to break the filibuster, first of all, and then vote to expand the court. I don't see it. I just don't. And so if we start doing this thing where we're like, we need to start taking radical action now, and if they don't do something now, then I fear that you're going to risk depressing the vote, because you're going to send a signal to voters that the Democrats could do something about it now, and they're choosing not to, when the reality is there are these structural obstacles that you just have to contend with. And so now I think is the time to start laying the foundation for that to happen in the future. I think we need to temper our expectations accordingly and be smart about this.
What does that look like, setting the foundation? Because what I would want from you is, you have to give me something, not thinking about it. Words have to be spoken by people in power. If it's not in public, I need, let me put to you like this, and you tell me what I'm missing. And it could be just my genuine frustration because Democrats, I think, in a lot of ways tend to be pussies when it comes to wielding power. And I don't know if we talked about this last time, but the Senate Judiciary Chairman, Dick Durbin, okay, very few hearings he had a couple of hearings about the two right-wing billionaires, Leonard Leo and Harlan Crow, who have been Clarence Thomas's bankrollers. He finally bit the bullet and issued subpoenas. Obviously, they didn't go anywhere because you need 60 votes in the Senate to enforce them. But at least he had a hearing. It excited Democrats. And then, of course, he just let it go ever since. I think noisemaking is a valuable tool of Democrats in power, especially when you have the gavel. Having hearings, having investigations, making noise. I also think that Democrats, for example, with the blue slip process, which I've mentioned before in videos, I may not have mentioned it here, which would allow Biden with a simple majority to just fill district court vacancies the way that Republicans did for circuit court vacancies when Trump was president. They revoked this de facto veto that senators had. If President Josiah wanted to fill a vacancy in Senator Hutch's state, Senator Hutch could come back and say, Mr. President, no, not this nominee. You got to pick a different one. Republicans came in and with brute force said, we're not honoring that anymore. And when Senator Josiah wants to fill a vacancy in Hutch's seat, it doesn't matter what Hutch says. As long as I've got the votes, I did it. Democrats had the power to do that with district judges, and we chose not to. And as a consequence of that, Aileen Cannon, a district judge in Florida, is presiding over Trump's documents case because we didn't brute force our fucking way through and fill those vacancies.
But you're making my point for me. That same senator is going to serve in the next Congress, and you think that he's going to be open to packing the court?
Well, let's
he
say
wasn't
actually,
but you think,
actually, no, I think you're making my point for me, which is he should have done it. And I think you would say, no, he should not have done it. It was good that he chose not to do that.
No, I'm not saying that. I'm just talking about dealing with the world as it is. And so
you agree then. So wait a minute. So just so I'm clear, but then I'll concede the point. You agree that Democrats, if they win the Senate and they win the presidency, if you had it your way, you would pack the court.
Yes.
Well,
yes.
Perfect. Then I concede.
Well,
perfect.
But it's
yes.
I
yes.
think but to stick on this point, the idea of whether or not it's probable that we end up with a decent amount of Democrats, at least enough Democrats, obviously, to actually make this move. I do take it to be the case that because of the movement in the Democratic base, and also because of just the actions, and something that a lot of Democrats have described is like, man, Republicans it's hard to even work with them at all, right? Like they're just like personally, it's difficult to work with these radical MAGA Republicans in Congress, right? Whether you're in the Senate or you're in the House. Obviously, the House has been, for one reason or another, it's a little bit quicker to adjust to this than the Senate. But I do think that these individual moments have led to a more radical Democratic Party. And so some examples that I can point to, the Democratic Party of Obama, when he took office, wasn't even willing to I think they passed a $800 billion stimulus. That was after the greatest financial crisis in like U.S. history since the Great Depression. And they were roundly criticized because of how moderate they were on Obamacare and the stimulus and basically everything when Obama took office, with 60 senators in the Senate. With smaller margins and arguably less justification, Joe Biden was able to pass substantially more everything when it comes to legislative accomplishments than Obama. And in part, what you heard from a lot of senators when they were willing to vote for reconciliation, when they were willing to stay together on these big spending packages, was we cannot trust the GOP to bog down and delay every single thing that we want to do. And I agree that the court would have been off the table in a similar environment even a week ago, right? But the Supreme Court has led to the whole country losing confidence in them as an institution. And I think that a lot of senators who maybe previously we would have thought, oh, there's no way they're going to support packing the court. There's no way they're going to support ethics reform. There's no way they're going to support limiting appellate jurisdiction. I mean, they're people too. They see how crazy this ruling is too. And I wouldn't be so sure that the 50 Democrats we end up with in the Senate come January 25 wouldn't be willing to do these things just because how crazy the decision is that the court made.
Well, there's no question that the Democratic side of Congress has become more willing to take this kinds of like radical action. I take your point with like the size of the stimulus package. There's, just to draw a point to another issue, there used to be literal dozens of pro-life Democrats serving in the Congress on the Democratic side of the aisle. Now there's a grand total of one in the entire party that is against codifying Roe. and he's gonna probably be fucking
being
yeah,
investigated currently.
he's some bribery thing or whatever. I'm saying that I think that the smart play for Biden right now is to simply say, like, that's a question for Congress, and I think Congress should talk about this. And I think there should be senators out there making strong statements. I saw Mark Kelly. I think is he still in the Senate? Was it him? I saw one blue senator I believe it was him, talking about how there's a need to take action with this court and take action on Roe. And so, like, the conversation needs to start, and it needs to charge up, and it needs to rev up. I don't see the upside currently of Biden taking a strong stance. I think it comes with more risk than benefit. That's just my calculation.
I mean, at the end of the day, functionally, you're correct, because Biden's not going to take a strong stance on the Supreme Court. Like, I just don't think he has it in him. And yeah, unfortunately, I mean, to a large degree, it kind of goes back to the previous conversation, is that the issue with keeping Biden as a nominee overall is that the only way to end the stigma with regards to his mental acuity is to have him out campaigning in the public as much as possible.
Yeah.
Whereas his immediate staff seems to think we absolutely can't do that, right? We need to have him taking very little interviews. We don't want to be scheduling a lot of events with Biden. Maybe it's like they said, because he just can't stay up that late or whatever. But obviously, whatever the excuse is, it's unfortunate that Biden, I don't think, has the capability to be a particularly strong messenger on almost anything. I saw a tweet from a socialist guy on Twitter who I really like his economic analysis for the most part, but he is not a fan of Democratic Party politics. He's one of these sort of Green Party type, socialists who doesn't believe in voting for the Democrats or whatever. But what he said, I think, resonated, which is, does Biden have any sort of platform he wants to run on? Because if you think about it, right? What policies has Joe Biden and the Democrats even advocated for this whole election cycle? I can't think of anything, right? I can't think of literally anything. I haven't heard Biden talk about $15 minimum wage.
I can tell you one. I can tell you one, which brings us right back to this. Codifying Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
They want to codify Roe v. Wade. Elect me and I'll codify Roe v. Wade. Here's the problem. And we end up right back. Oh, you can't. In theory, you could. You could,
but I mean, for the same reasons of court packing, it's the same pickle that we're in.
Well, even if I don't know, I'm actually pretty confident that if we retake the House and we keep the Senate, I actually am pretty confident that we could codify Roe, because Manchin's the only one I know who's opposed to codifying Roe. I thought you guys were hinting.
No, Manchin's not. Manchin wouldn't oppose it. He said he wouldn't oppose it.
I thought he said he would. I thought he voted against codifying Roe the last time that it went, the Women's Health Protection Act or whatever. I thought he was the one vote against it.
February 13th, Manchin supports bipartisan effort to codify Roe v. Wade.
February 13th.
He co-sponsored the Bipartisan Reproductive Freedom for All Act. So maybe it was a different form of codification that maybe didn't.
Yeah, it was the Women's Health Reproductive Act, or the Women's Health Act of 2022. Yeah. But so I actually think it stands a good chance. The problem is, even if you get it through a Democratic House, a Democratic Senate, sign it into law by a Democratic president, there will be challenges, and it will be reviewed by the Supreme Court of the United States. What's to stop them from striking it down again? That's the problem. At the end of the day, I just go back to where I started. It's not optional. It's just only a question of how it is done. This court has to be radically changed. And as far as I'm concerned, again, I say this to anyone watching, I have no patience for anyone who's like, nope, not only can we not talk about it, just listen, wait 50 years. You're out of your fucking mind. I think Hutch brings up some good points as far as like tactics, but even Hutch is like, yeah, this court has to be crushed and reformed. Because it has to be.
This speaks to an interesting dilemma in modern politics.
Sure.
It directly relates to what we were talking about. I don't know if you guys saw, do you guys know the fashion influencer James Charles? He does like makeup stuff.
Yeah, I saw that fucking thing.
Right. So he went viral on TikTok, throwing a shit fit about, how Biden is choosing not to codify Roe, basically. Like, it speaks to an interesting dilemma, because conventionally, when politicians run campaigns, the way that they present their platform is in the form of promises. Specifically when we're talking about presidents. And the implicit understanding there is that they will deliver on that agenda if the American people deliver a Congress that will sign a bill and send it to their desk. but it's technically a little misleading sometimes, right? Like sometimes politicians make promises that they know full well they're not going to follow through. But for strategic purposes, they need to proceed under the assumption that they will win the presidency and the American people will deliver a Congress that can actually deliver that agenda. But now we have this new sort of like social media fueled their electorate, which is like a lot frustrating in a lot of ways. But I think on the whole, people are more informed than they used to be. Sometimes they're misinformed and sometimes they don't really understand the things that were being discussed, but people are generally aware of things in a way that they weren't like 20 years ago. I just wonder if you guys think like, to me, it's just because Biden gets a lot of shit for it. And it shows up, a lot of that shit shows up on my feed of like, well, you're promising these things, but then why didn't you do it the last time? I wonder if you guys think like, should modern politicians like alter their language? I personally don't think it's a super winning campaign.
Yeah, the incentive structure doesn't exist.
By this or that, but the House isn't looking too good, so let's temper our expectations.
The incentive structure doesn't exist for politicians to be more honest. I agree. I think it would just cool temperatures. I think it would be more honest, and I think it would set expectations accordingly. If they could, if they could add qualifiers, if they could hedge, if they could like, listen, I'd like to do this, but it's also conditional on you doing this, this, and this for me as well. But to your point, that's uninspiring. People would be like, people would tune out from that. I don't think that sort of honesty would be rewarded in anything other than the West Wing. And that's a fucking problem, because also, yes, I saw that, would you say that the person's name was Charles?
James Charles.
Yeah, that was maddening. And that's not the only one. It's not isolated. Like you look at Twitter all the time, and this is why I have to remind myself, Twitter is not real life. It is the least trafficked of all the social media, the major social media websites. This isn't necessarily how real people think. But yeah, people blame Biden for the repeal of Roe v. Wade.
Yeah.
They blame Biden for anti-trans legislation, which is happening in Florida. It's like, it's maddening. It's like, and then they'll say, then this is what they do. When you remind them, hey, asshole, this is not how civics works. There is separation of powers. There's federalism involved. The president, well, prior to 2 days ago, the president could just, impose his will on the constituent states. Then this is what they hit you with, Hutch. They go, okay, well, you say that Biden is basically impotent, but that if Trump becomes president, he's going to be this all-powerful dictator. So which is it? Is the president all-powerful or is the president impotent?
Right.
That's what they hit you with.
And that also ties into the Supreme Court opinion, because I saw so many takes. I'm saying hundreds of people that were like, well, the Supreme Court just said that the president can do whatever he wants. So why doesn't Biden just codify Roe? Why didn't he just expand the court? And so there are people out there that are taking that Supreme Court opinion and then turning that into, well, the Supreme Court said that the president can usurp Congress's powers. And that's not what the Supreme Court decision said. And so it sometimes feels like you're fighting upstream on social media. There's just an abject lack of faith in institutions and the Democratic Party right now. But as you said, Twitter is not, it literally is not real life. Okay. Young voters showed up in larger numbers. It was the largest number in 50 years of youth turnout in 2020. 2022 midterms was the second highest numbers for young voters. Number one being in 2018. And so the reality is that even though there's nothing but doom and gloom and a lot of apathy and a lot of like complete bullshit on social media, the reality is that young voters are more energized now than they have been in decades. That's just a fact.
Yeah, I mean, I think that a lot of the times I think it's easy to get really disheartened when you see really dumb fucks on Twitter saying stupid shit. But I mean, at the same time, like we always have to keep in mind, like you said, Hutch, young people, even by the polling today, right? Even like a lot of people are saying, oh my goodness, Israel-Palestine is going to cause, a bunch of young people to sit out. It's like, that just doesn't seem to be bore out in the polling. It doesn't seem to be bore out in primary results currently. Like even if we were just looking at primary results, not only for Joe Biden, just turnout in the Democratic primary, but also primary results with regard to the actual Democratic candidates, it's not clear that there's an overwhelming movement that is either saying we got to sit out the election or we have to primary these Democrats who are too pro-Israel. And yeah, I mean, it's just the case that I think a lot of young people realize, Biden might not be our favorite candidate. I mean, young people, I'm 27. I'm still part of this, younger voter demographic for, however many more years I can hold on to that. But I think most young people are kind of like me, where it's like, yeah, Biden's obviously not the ideal candidate. But at the same time, we can't get, we don't want our brains to fall out of our heads, right? We still have to vote for him because he's obviously a lot better than Trump. I just think that there's always been a lot of people that blame the president for shit that's not his fault, or things that he doesn't have any power over. I think that social media just amplifies those voices, right? I mean, we get what I'm saying. Like, how many people would have, stubbed their toe back in the 1990s and said, "God damn it, fucking Bill Clinton, piece of shit." Like,
thanks, Obama. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. I mean,
these are problems that are unique to the modern era because of social media. These are just things that like politicians didn't necessarily need to worry about in the 90s or the 80s. And now you do have to consider like James Charles going viral and like, like is there a need to do any kind of like counter messaging on that?
Well, again,
just,
this is, I do think there is. So here's the problem. This is, and it goes back to triage and how we assign our limited resources. But this is kind of like my boilerplate rant about the issues that we have in American politics. The Republican Party, the conservative movement, but its political proxy is the GOP. They are just so crazy advantaged in this country. And I know like the whole aesthetic for them is just grievance and victimhood, but they have an advantage in the Electoral College. They have an advantage in the Senate. Their senators represent 40 to 45 million fewer Americans than ours. Because of gerrymandering, they have an outsized advantage in the House, even though it's supposed to favor, more populous states, which would presumably advantage blue states. I digress.
They're also advantaged by undocumented immigrants being counted on the census.
Correct. Even though that's a talking point, red states tend to be advantaged more with that. They're advantaged with respect to the configuration of states. 30 out of 50 state legislatures, 30 out of 50 are controlled by Republicans. They have an advantage in the media. The biggest element of mainstream media is the Fox propaganda network. They blow MSNBC and CNN out of the water. OAN, Newsmax, we talked about an alternate media. You have the Daily Wire, you have Tim Pool, you have Steven Crowder. So they are advantaged in this space by far. And then the mainstream media. Go ahead. No, I was going to say, even the mainstream media, as we discussed, they'll gladly throw Democrats under the bus for the sake of sensationalism. Then Hutch just introduced another one, which is the disinformation coming from either psyops or really stupid people misunderstanding civics. All of these things. And then we are held and we hold ourselves to higher standards. Mm-hmm. This is a problem. Republicans, when they have a taste of power, they seize it and they use it to exacerbate these institutional advantages. We don't. We are getting better. We are getting increasingly fed up with the state of affairs. But we are institutionalists to a fault, even when they heavily advantage Republicans. So then the question is, what do we do with our resources? And I think it's a tough question. I really do. I don't have the answers. I just spend my time bitching at Republicans because I think that's what needs to be done.
I think even with your exhaustive list, which I totally agree with, I think you're missing the most important advantage that the Republicans have. The conservative project is just way easier to sell.
Fundamentally.
Their whole premise is just government sucks, everything sucks, the system sucks. Don't trust politicians, don't trust DC. It's just way easier to sell that than, here's a fucking 10-year plan to tackle climate change. It's You're just right. And when we're talking about people that are largely disengaged from politics, those messages resonate with those people. They could be struggling in their life to get a raise, and they don't like it when grocery prices go up, and they're just generally discontent and whatever. And when a politician like Donald Trump comes along and says, yes, I understand your pain, here's why, everything sucks, and it's just so much easier to sell that than to sell an optimistic view of the future.
And then they don't have to. And then the best part is, you're right. That is the most fundamental. Like everything else is downstream. It's a codification of that, which is it easier to build a skyscraper or to not build one? Is it easier to build a skyscraper or to sabotage a skyscraper from being built? Is it easier to build a skyscraper or to demolish one?
Right.
Even to the extent that you presume energy on behalf of the conservatives, either doing nothing, preventing something, or destroying something. All of those things are easier than building something. And then there's an incentive structure, reward structure. So Republican politicians, this is insane. This is the ultimate racket. How the fuck are they able to go, hey, listen, government sucks. Government doesn't do anything for you. So please reelect me. Please, I am part of the government that fails you and that sucks. And you should reward me with your vote. Ted Cruz is a great example of that. That's his sales pitch, and he's almost certainly going to defeat Colin Allred, and that's the state that was supposed to be the easiest for us to flip. But it's a video game they get to play on the easiest difficulty with all the cheats enabled. It's maddening. It's just fucking insane.
It's just simply much easier to distort a fact than to clarify one. And that's really I feel like that's like the fundamental tension between like the liberal or progressive project in this country and the conservative project. And it's just there's no easy way to do it. And somehow in this country, we went from the FDR-ification of politics, this grand expansion of the federal government, these hugely important and beneficial programs that greatly expanded the welfare state, to Ronald Reagan getting up there on a debate stage and saying, like, what is it? That the 7 worst words you can say are, I'm from the government,
I'm here to help.
And it just rotted boomers' brains out. And he was this charismatic guy. And it just, how do we get back to that fucking FDR? Sorry, God.
I was gonna say, we have to keep that in mind as well, right? This is all the boomers' fault, right? And I say that pretty confidently, right? Because we have to think like, how will millennials tend to vote as they get older? Well, we were, the youngest millennials, people like me and maybe the oldest Gen Zers, we were raised at a time when Obama was coming to political prominence, and we'll probably be greatly influenced by that the rest of our lives. Boomers were, they were pretty young when Reagan was coming to the rise of political prominence, or at the very least, I think they were in like their, 30s and 40s or something like that. Like, obviously, that was a very influential time. They see the neoliberal turn in the Democratic Party when Clinton won as well, right? So it was basically like 20 straight uninterrupted years of exactly the kind of rhetoric that you're talking about, Hutch. But now it's not as if boomers are just they're all gone, right? Trump wins in 2016 when I think the oldest boomer was maybe in his late 60s, right? Which is to say like the overwhelming majority of boomers were still alive, right? And so we have this hugely disproportionate amount of old people who are like conservatizing our politics, right? And so that's one of the reasons, I don't know, it's a bit under discussed. I've thought about doing a more in-depth video on it, but like the idea that like COVID disproportionately killed, like I think like 90% of the people who died from COVID in America were over the age of 50. And obviously those people were overwhelmingly conservative. The people dying today of COVID are overwhelmingly conservative because they don't get vaccinated. And just the fact that boomers are old, right? There's many less boomers today than there were 4 years ago, than there were when Donald Trump actually won in 2016. And that's something I've always been very curious about, is that I think our politics has gotten very radical because we literally just have a disproportionate amount of radical right-wingers in our country because they're all old. But they've also disproportionately died in significant, numbers, right? Because of COVID and not getting vaccinated and things like this. So I don't know. I'm curious how that'll actually, I think that's part of the reason why there might be this structural Democratic advantage, or in the polling that you mentioned, where the special elections we are overperforming in the midterms and stuff like that, and not to mention that Trump told a bunch of old people that historically voted by mail that voting by mail is wrong and you shouldn't do it, and now you have to vote same day on election, and it's like no policy person would tell your constituents only to vote on election day because shit just comes up, right? There's going to be some margin of your own supporters who just don't end up voting on that day, right? Because they didn't have the time to, or shit came up, or they got sick or whatever. And so for all those reasons, Republicans have really shot themselves in the foot. But I think that their time of enjoying structural advantage might be coming to an end. Josiah. That's what I'm trying to say.
These demographic shifts are part of the reason why I try to urge people to be more like practical in what they're selling to voters, like a little bit more honest. Like that's why I sort of urge caution when we're talking about like Biden overpromising on maybe Roe or expanding the courts, is because it is just a reality that Gen X and younger are markedly more progressive and liberal than their elder counterparts. And time doesn't seem to be changing that. It's these current generations, or those generations and younger, seem to be bucking the trend of the very real trend that used to exist of people when they got older, they were getting more conservative. My dad went from a fucking Clinton supporting Democrat to a MAGA Republican. You know, there's millions of those people. And who knows, maybe when we become boomer elderly, like we'll go through a similar sort of like transformation. We really don't know. But right now, what we can see plainly is that it's part of this is a waiting game. And it's just to be a little morbid about it. Like part of it is just waiting for the older generation to die off. And I do have a firm level of optimism about the future. You know, there's certain things that we have to contend with now that are emergencies, just like you guys are saying. But I still think there are so many reasons to feel optimistic in this moment, even in spite of just what has objectively been one of the worst weeks to cover politics in you know, my entire adult life. Even in the face of all that, I think we need to start thinking about politics in terms of 10 years, 20 years, 30 years. We need to start imagining things further down the line. And we do need to exercise a certain degree of patience. We can't expect that things are just going to, just like that, you know?
No, but I think that the problem is that given, you know, you mentioned earlier, especially with respect to the court, the decades long scheming increment by increment of the Heritage Foundation and the Federalist Society. And we talked about the various institutional advantages, some of which have existed since the beginning of the country for conservatives. You know, assuming, you know, recognizing that any sort of change requires power and grips on the levers of power. You could even make the case that, you know, yes, fundamentally it's easier to be conservative than liberal or progressive. And then it was codified even into the basic structure of the United States with respect to federalism or separation of powers. When you diversify the levers of power, it makes it harder to affect change, right? That's why we have a bicameral legislature instead of a unicameral legislature, which most other advanced countries have, because it's easier to thwart change. Then you get granular into the specific institutions that I discussed in my rant a few minutes ago. The thing is, I agree with you that we have to we actually do have to play the short-term game as well. We can't afford to just like take no action, right? And I'm not saying that's what you're advocating for. We have to do two things simultaneously. We have to act in the moment, but also start to train ourselves to think about the next generation of political action. The problem is, I don't think conservatives are necessarily stopping that either, or rather, and maybe they are, but maybe they feel that's because their institutional advantages are so entrenched that they can basically, you know, function on autopilot or put the cruise control on. Because again, I go back to, bring it all the way back to the Supreme Court. Even with the setbacks that they've encountered legislatively, when you have a court that in its current structure is the final boss of democracy, purely because we let it. Again, this is the funny, they've got no fucking army. They have no military. They have no police force. It's just the deference we pay to this court that is wildly unpopular and wildly out of step. They can strike down the vast majority of things we want to do, and they are practically untouchable. And so going back to it, yes, I agree that we have to play the long game, but I'm not saying you're not advocating for this, but just to reaffirm it, it also means that when the stars align and we do have power, we use it. Not gently. We force change down their throats against their will. We say, Republicans, we have the numbers. We're not asking you. We are telling you the way it's going to be. And unfortunately, this is where I'm excited for the future, because the people like Dick Durbin is a good example. Again, the Senate Judiciary Chairman, he's got to go. He's a pussy. He's a loser. He is the anchor around us, dragging us down. He is of the past. We have to elect radicals, and I don't mean necessarily like people who are. Well, AOC is a good example, right? AOC is somebody who I think has not lost her radical edge, but she has recognized that now that she wields institutional power, she has to be deft, right?
She's matured.
Very much so. But you know, if she had a taste of the power that she seeks, she would actually follow through. She would pack the court. She would break the filibuster. She would cram voting rights, federal.
She would implement communism.
Yes. Well, I don't know if it'd go that far, but that's what I love is she's not at the point where she is so matured that she has lost the fire.
Mhm.
And that's what I hope. I hope that we're able to straddle that line. For
We need
decades to
that
come.
without like rape apologia for Hamas. You know what I mean? Which is like, seems to be in short supply.
I wish people recognize more is it's not just that she's matured. I don't know if you know this, but she's the vice ranking member of the oversight committee. That's staggering to me. She's Jamie Raskin's second in freaking command. Jamie Raskin, constitutional scholar, the professor, the elder statesman of the Democratic Party in the House of Representatives. I think in many ways second only to Hakeem Jeffries. And she is his right-hand woman on the most important committee. AOC is just, I don't know. I'm so freaking impressed by her.
Yep, I agree. She's awesome. Like I said, the Democrat depth chart is super big. So I think I don't know. After I think 2020 didn't quite show how great the Democratic depth chart was, especially because there were so many of those governors that got elected for the first time in 2018. So obviously they didn't run in 2020. But I don't know, man. It feels like assuming Biden is the nominee and you don't have like Harris running for re-election or something like that in 2028, I feel like we're really spoiled for choice as Democrats in 2028. That'll be quite an interesting primary.
Who do you think is going to be the front runner for the party in 2028?
There's no way.
Yeah.
You could, yeah.
Hard to predict. I think if Trump wins the second election, so ultimately the person who wins the Democratic primary is typically the person who's able to get black people to vote for them, right? And this is like the biggest problem that Bernie had in 2016. It's the biggest problem that people like Pete or Amy Klobuchar had in 2020 and Bernie had in 2020 again. It's just that like one of the issues is that black people are very influenced as voters, it seems, by the endorsements of their own representatives, which is obviously very reasonable. And so you end up with scenarios where it seems like a lot of the times there's not like a huge competition for black votes. And because black votes are so concentrated in like huge majorities of, not majorities, but like huge portions of the state, what you'll see is like consistently literally all the way from like Jimmy Carter to today, the person who wins the Democratic primary is typically the person who gets the black vote, because it's like a huge portion of the country in the Democratic primary that ends up coming through. And so it's just hard to imagine certain candidates like breaking that threshold. Like Pete Buttigieg, it's like, I don't know, man. Like, would he ever get like, black people from like Alabama to vote for him? Like, I'm just not sure. Obviously, like Biden is really popular with black voters, so it's like anything's possible, of course. But I think it's going to be a candidate who's able to inspire that voting base, who's most likely to be the candidate in 2028. But I'm not sure who that necessarily would be. Like, it could be somebody like Gretchen Whitmer, for instance, governor of Michigan. But it's very difficult to predict.
Yeah, to your point, black voters in South Carolina are literally the reason that Biden is the president today. You can draw a straight line from that strong performance to the moderates coalescing around him by the time Super Tuesday came out. I do see some people talking about like it. To be clear, Gavin Newsom is remarkably gifted rhetorically. And like, I don't know if you guys have ever watched any of his interviews with Hannity, but Hannity is like, he does a thing that a lot of conservatives do, which is just gish gallop, just throw like fucking 7 crazy things at you. And it's really difficult to rhetorically contend with that. You have to be sharp in order to contend with that, which is one of the reasons why Biden had such a terrible performance on Thursday, is because Trump is like the master of the gish gallop. He'll connect like 8 dots that don't make any sense. And so it's like his mind just kind of gets fried and he doesn't know where to begin. Newsom is a guy that can take a gish gallop of like 7 crazy points and literally keep all of those points in his head and deconstruct them one by one sequentially, like in the order that it was given. That's a really kind of unique talent. That does not translate to votes in Michigan or Pennsylvania or Wisconsin. Yeah. I think like people that are crowning him the coronated prince of the Democratic Party and all the speculation that he's going to come in and take over the nomination for Biden, I think is just not rooted in any kind of polling or reality that I've seen.
And he has to contend with a deep bench of Democratic governors. We got a strong bench of Democratic governors. And by the way, it's the closest job to the president. They are micro presidents. They're the chief executives of their state. You've got J.D. Pritzker, you got Gretchen Whitmer, Andy Beshear, and I say this as a proud former Kentuckian. Andy Beshear is hella underrated. He is a wildly popular governor in a deep red state with a conservative supermajority. Now, the conservative supermajority in the Kentucky Assembly, they hate his guts, and they've done everything in their power to strip the governor's mansion of its power. But he's exceedingly well liked. And so then of course, you get to Vice President Harris, Secretary Pete Buttigieg, things that we've talked about there. But we've also not talked about, again, members of the House. I mean, Eric Swalwell ran for president. He didn't do very well, but he's a good-looking guy, and he's rhetorically gifted. Jamie Raskin, we've never seen him tested on national level. I would kill for a President Raskin. Like, I would love a President Raskin. I wouldn't put it past AOC in the future to run for president. She's too young now to do it, but I wouldn't put it past her.
Try to grab a Senate seat first, or try to become a governor first, maybe. But no, I wouldn't count her out either.
Yeah, who would? It's Schumer. Who's the other New York senator? It's Schumer and
Gillibrand.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
She's pretty young.
She's still serving in the Senate. You never hear about her.
Yeah, I mean, she forgot about her too. Yeah,
I didn't hear much about her when she ran for president either. So
yeah, that's true.
Not a very fiery person.
The thing about the Democratic governors too is that they're all popular. That's the other thing too.
Yes.
Like all of them, have really good approval numbers. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I think it'll be really interesting. I think it'll be super competitive. I mean, like you said, I wouldn't be surprised if 2028 was like and assuming that the newly victorious Democratic president isn't running for re-election. That's a scenario where it's not going to be competitive primary, of course. But in the scenario where basically Trump either wins or Biden wins and it's an open primary in 2028, I'm expecting a similar like 2020 level primary where you have 30 credible people running for president, members of the House, U.S. senators, governors, maybe, throw in a couple mayors or something like that. And it'll be quite competitive. Obviously, I would agree with you, Hutch. I think that governor of California is a difficult. You've got a record that's difficult to defend, no matter which governor of California you're talking about, right? Because California does have a lot of structural problems. And although Kamala's from California, I said this in my video that I released today. At the end of the day, look, I mean, she can always just say, look, I was not the mayor of San Francisco. I wasn't running shit in San Francisco. I was not the governor of California. I was just the attorney general. Well, no, but seriously, this is one of the reasons, Josiah, why like governors and mayors have a harder time running for president, because they have an actual like running shit, tenure that they have to defend. When the police of San Francisco beat up some unarmed black guy or something, and it's like, if you're the mayor of that city, you have to answer for that. You have to answer, why did that happen? You're in charge.
Buttigieg is a great example. He ran into issues because of baggage that came out from his time as mayor of South Bend. Yeah.
Whereas nobody's going to look at the U.S. senator from California and be like, why are people shitting in the streets? It's like, bro, I'm not the governor. I'm just some senator, right? Like, I don't run California. I represent Californians, right? That's a much easier record to defend. And that's the burden of every governor. I just think that California in particular is kind of it's like people using Texas as an example of like the stupid conservatives running things, right? It's just like a quintessential example of, bad Democratic governance. And I think that somebody like a Beshear, a Gretchen, Whitmer, Big Gretch, as people are calling her. I think people like that, and then Kamala Harris as well, like just have a much easier time running on their records. Because
Josh Shapiro, Governor Shapiro of Pennsylvania, he's the one that I think we forgot about too.
Exactly. I think Beshear could be he's my dark horse like candidate for like future Democratic national politics. One of the issues that he could run into is he won't. Well, it could be an advantage as well because he won't be the governor by 2028, right? Because he'll be term limited. He'll be out by 2020. I think like December of 27 is when he would officially leave office. And so he'll be fully available, I guess, when the primaries start. So maybe that'll be an advantage. But governor of California, I've always been very skeptical of Newsom being like the obvious replacement for Joe Biden or some future contender of the Democratic Party. He's also had a lot of scandals in his own state, which make him look pretty bad. So
he used to be married to Don Jr.'s girlfriend.
Kimberly Guilfoyle, Gargoyle.
And obviously we're putting the cart before the horse a little bit, talking about 2028. We have an election to win this year. And just to I have to end it soon. I don't know about you guys, but
we'll wrap it up here in a few minutes.
I just want to say we started on a somber note because it's just obviously this was a really difficult week in politics, but next week is going to be a different week, and the week after that's going to be a different week, and the week after that's going to be a different week. And I still believe it is possible for Democrats to pull off literally a trifecta in November. And I guarantee you that the smart Republicans that are running campaigns right now on the national level are considering that possibility as well. They're not counting that possibility out because they've seen the same election results that we've been seeing over the last 2.5 years. I remain committed, like utterly committed. I'm just as committed now as I was before the debate to show up and vote in November and do whatever I can with the platform that I have to convince as many people to do the same. I think it's hugely important, and I think we can win. So that's what I want to say to close my end out.
What about you, Akana boy?
Yeah, I mean, I think I'm cautiously, extremely cautiously optimistic still at this point that Democrats can pull it off. At the end of the day, for whatever you can say about Biden and his mental acuity, at least he sounds a little crazier because he's getting older and he's not just actually crazy like Donald Trump, right? I mean, there's a reason why so many people are saying vote blue no matter who. There's a reason why Destiny's on Piers Morgan saying he would vote for an urn of Biden's ashes over Donald Trump. And I genuinely think that 45% of the country feels that way. Like that there's almost nothing that Biden can do that would lead him to getting much worse than 45% of the vote. Now that's not enough to win, but at very least your margin of victory is much smaller in that regard. So your hurdle isn't necessarily as big. That being said, I would still say that Biden is not our strongest candidate. But certainly, if he is the candidate, I think we'll know for sure if he'll be the candidate within 2 weeks. We don't have that much time, right? 16 weeks until the election. So obviously we got to figure this out pretty soon. And so I think in the next couple of weeks, we'll get some clarity on that. And if it is Biden, then I think that's probably not optimal, but he can certainly still win because Trump fucking sucks, and people kind of realize that and have realized that ever since they elected him to be president in the first place. So be at least a little optimistic, people. We'll see.
Yeah. So for me, like I said, I totally understand, appreciate, respect the fact that the question about who should be the nominee is being asked. At this point, I think it is a question that is best reserved behind closed doors with the people who actually have influence over the question. So that's me. I will support the Democratic nominee no matter who it is. I think President Biden has been an objectively good president. And yes, he had a terrible debate performance, but so did Trump. And again, nobody's talking about it. Trump lied many, 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 many more times than Biden. He also didn't answer questions directly, unlike Biden. He did not speak to substance, unlike Biden. Biden and Trump's record is night and day. Biden is just objectively the more capable administrator, executive, and legislator, and it's reflected in their records. To the extent that you want to give any president credit for their records, if that's the standard, and that's the standard that Republicans have always adhered to, that Trump was the genius behind the 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, even though he probably had nothing to do. He probably said, cut taxes for the rich, and then other people made it happen. But if that's the standard, that we give presidents credit for the things that they did, Biden just has an objectively better record. He is a more competent executive. And Democrats in general have better records of governance than the Republican Party. And so, yes, no matter who the candidate is, you should turn out and vote. And it's not enough to win the White House. We have to get them all. We have to kick the Republicans out of the majority in the House, and we have to keep the Senate. As far as the future goes, again, I think once that immediate problem is dealt with, we have to seriously look at constraining this court, because this court is the big looming threat, and they will make everything harder. Reproductive rights, empowering regulatory agencies for to help control, or address the environment and clean water and things like that. But also, again, voting rights, civil liberties, these things, they have already corroded those liberties. And even if we pass federal laws, they can strike it down. This court will have to be dealt with. But if you're an eligible voter here in the United States, I think you should turn out and vote for whoever the fucking Democrat is in every election possible. If they're Republican, as far as I'm concerned, you shouldn't even consider it. It's just a bad faith authoritarian party with no limiting principle. And the Supreme Court decision just proves it, man. Making the president God king is dangerous shit. But
Look,
yeah,
I just want to say one more thing, man. Just
sure.
for the viewers that are watching this, like, lick your wounds. It's fine to lick your wounds for a little bit, but get back in the fucking fight, okay? If you
That's
think
right.
Donald Trump, if you think his supporters had an easy time defending him, as delusional as many of them are, he gave them some very difficult days, okay? They did not feel good when it came out that he suggested nuking a hurricane. They did not feel great when he suggested looking into injecting bleach. They did not feel good when the Charleston thing happened with the white supremacists. Those were difficult days for them, okay? So this is still a fight, and you know,
and the
you're a part
polling
of that
isn't
fight,
the
man.
polling isn't that brutal. Again, I mean, Biden's had some
He dropped
slips, but like
1.1 points in the act.
exactly.
I mean, it's not good, but it's like
Yeah.
What does it say about Trump that Biden had that debate performance and Biden only dropped 1.1 points?
Great point, Hunch. Not only that, but that Trump and Biden are still competitive given all the fucking advantages that Trump has that we've talked about. The guy's graded on a curve by the media. He really is. They don't talk about his gaffes, his mental decline, his criminality. They grade him on a fucking curve, and he can still barely squeak 50-50 with Biden. I'm just saying. It's a good point. It's a winnable fight, guys.
I mean, we got on one hand, guys, we got the fascists, but have you considered that Biden's pretty old? I feel like that's probably the bigger issue in this race. So hopefully the mainstream media recognizes that and continues to call Biden old instead of Trump a fascist.
Steel yourselves, for Christ's sakes. It's going to be a long 4 months. Pace yourselves. All right.
Maintain your
Guys,
resolve.